Hello, my name is Julia for African Mirror TV, and we're here today in Bern in front of the General Secretary of the Federal Building for Interior. We're going to talk to Madame Doris Angst, the Director of the Commission Against Racism, about issues that concern us all, discrimination and racism in Switzerland. So please come with me and let's go inside and talk to her. Thank you for accepting this interview. We're here today to speak about racism, and we're here to speak with Madame Angst. Can you tell us more about your background?
I'm by education a historian, and have always been interested in minority religions, minority cultures, even being myself a member of the majority where I was born and where I was raised. In 1995, when the Federal Commission Against Racism was created, I was elected to be the executive director, and I fulfilled this job until today. That means for 19 years now.
It's a long time. So you have a lot of experience, and this is why we wanted to talk to you. And we would like to know how you would personally rate racism and discrimination in Switzerland.
Yes, I think until 1995, when Switzerland adhered to the International Convention Against Racism, the topic and the subject was totally denied. Everybody, and it prevails still today, unfortunately, this opinion, everybody was of the opinion that in a federal country, which as a system protects minorities, and in a country with a direct democracy, per definition, there cannot be such thing as a discrimination. But this is wrong, actually. I even think it prevents the acknowledgement of the normality of racism. And I think that's one of the toughest topics that we still have today to debate and to work on.
So if you say that racism should be acknowledged in Switzerland, what is the history of the racism that we know for this country?
Switzerland was an open country in the 19th century. It still is an open country today, but there is a certain dichotomy between the needs of the economy and the needs of society. And you have a progressive part in society, a part that is related to the world, and you have another part which is more conservative. There is also, to a certain extent, or has been a xenophobic tradition in Switzerland that the country itself defined itself as an antagonism to all the countries all around. And at the same time, we always had quite a large influx of immigrants, which created this dichotomy.
Would you say that this xenophobic tradition in the 20th century became, in the society, it became more accepted?
I think there are like two streams, and the two directions and the two streams have been accentuated by the fact that racism was out in the open after 95. So you have two political directions that also fight each other, the ones that want to open, the ones that want to fight against racism, and the ones that opt for an unlimited freedom of speech, also to denigrate other people. And this is where we stand today, and it has been lasting for the last 20 years already.
For example, if we think about the latest initiatives from the populist right wing in Switzerland, how would you rate this towards racism?
I think the strongest enemy in the fight against racism and discrimination has been and is today right-wing populism. Right-wing populism works with emotions, with negative sentiments, with being uneasy with something, and exploits this to with political aims. And so it's quite clear that right-wing parties in general opt against the fight against racism, and usually their argument is unlimited freedom of speech.
So, so racism in Switzerland, you would say that it exists?
Yes, it does exist and prevail in our country. We have come to distinguish different forms. Historically speaking, the oldest form is, I would say, anti-Semitism. It's not something apart, it's one form of racism. Then with colonialism and enlightenment came up anti-black racism. And Swiss people tend to think, since we were never a colonialist power, that's not something that regards us at all. Today we also speak of anti-Ziganism. That means a very hostile attitude towards travelers, gypsies, in Switzerland the Yenish. You have Islamophobia, we rather would prefer to call hostile attitude towards Muslims, in order to distinguish that from hostile attitude towards the religion or the content of the religion as such. What we witness here is more hostile attitude towards Muslims as such, or people that are regarded as Muslims, non-regarding if they are really religious or not. Mm-hmm. And there might be new forms turning up.
Your institution's mandate on racism and discrimination in Switzerland, because, for example, when you say there will be new forms turning up, what is your point of view on this one?
The Federal Commission was created by the Federal Council in 1995 with a mandate to observe, to analyze. So we are free and independent to choose our topics and our subjects of research. And I'm proud to say that quite often the FCR was the first one, was really at the vanguard of pointing at a certain situation and being like a warning voice in saying, attention, there is racism, we have to do something against that. Mm-hmm. That's part of our mandate, to observe and to analyze.
So this FCR commission, to know more about it, how is it composed? How does the research work?
All the extra parliamentary commissions are under quite a tough rule, government rule. We count, as many other ones as well, 15 members. The commission consists of representatives of minorities, minority religions, the cantons, of experts, of media persons. Then we have the social partners present in the commission. Like this, we are like a think tank. The commission functions like a think tank. These people are elected by the Federal Council ad personam. That means they can act independently within the framework of the commission. And the Commission's executive organ is the Secretariat, doted by modest 3 full posts. And the Commission has a budget, an annual budget of 200,000 francs to spend. Okay. Not very much.
But you also collaborate with other commissions to try to, for example, effectively prevent racism in the future?
Yes. For example, there are also cases of multiple discrimination, where somebody might be discriminated against as a woman, as in a socially weak position, as a single mother, and maybe being of African origin. So we have to put together all these different aspects. The Commission for Women's Issues, the Commission for Migration Issues are our closest partners and have similar structures as we have.
And to prevent the racism in the future, what can you concretely do about it?
Well, to prevent racism in the future, I think that's a general political question. The Commission has criticized so far the lack of an anti-discrimination law in Switzerland. We do have a penal code in the an article in the criminal code on racial discrimination, but the very important fields of life as housing, lodging, and at the workplace are not really covered by this. So there's a lot of work to do in these fields, how to better protect victims of racism in the field of civil law. That's one of our strongest points that we made. The Commission has also launches its own research projects. For example, we published last year a research on how the Yenish travelers, gypsies, are presented in the Swiss media. And the outcome really was that they're severely stereotyped. We launched a research with the University of Basel on highly qualified persons at the workplace of immigrant origin. There, one of the results was that it's mostly people from non-European countries, non-Western countries, even people who had fulfilled and accomplished all their studies here in Switzerland have special difficulties in finding good jobs, academic jobs, yes.
And for example, in the political field, on the political discourse, what would you say about this one? How can you try to interfere in that?
Well, the Federal Commission also has the freedom to comment freely on government issues, also on what's happening in the media, what politicians say. And we are sometimes quite severely criticizing the political discourse that is really within the framework of this very large freedom of expression, where we think one should shift in the weighing of interest between protection against discrimination and freedom of speech. We should shift a little bit more to the side that seems important to us.
And for example, do you also observe with the new media that we have today easier hate speech on the internet, for example?
Yes, we do. Just quite recently, there was a cyber attack to a certain way, really hate speech and calling for violence on the internet and on the social media. And I think this has to be politically and with international convention has to be attacked and worked upon.
And for example, we see all the tangram in front of us. What is your institution concretely doing to fight racism? What do you do?
The publications, the research, also the awareness raising campaigns that we have here in front of us are aimed at first informing an interested public. That means public officials in the administration, people responsible in the cantons that lack information. Very often we find that people know little about what racism is, and sometimes are quite stiff or without ideas how to fight it. Now with the bulletin, we aim at having a single topic in each of the issues, such as, for example, racism at the workplace, securities and safety. Can you feel safe if the police targets you being a person of dark skin and maybe practice racial profiling? Then the internet, we have dealt with that already in 2008. And I'm proud to say that our newest bulletin is devoted to anti-black racism.
So what does the research say about the anti-black racism?
Research says that in a country like Switzerland, the problem also has been negated so far. Research also says that racial profiling is still practiced by the cantonal police, and that we need really awareness-raising campaigns and education accomplished within the police forces. I think it's also has been newly recognized that people of African descent, even if they are new immigrants or already a settled population, are really victims and target of a very specific form of racism, which stems from the high visibility. And I think Switzerland has its own problems in recognizing its own role within the colonial context that was also linked with Swiss economy.
You spoke about the cantons and the police. So, for example, if we speak of the canton, what can you do, or what can they do?
I think they've already started educational work within the police force. It is really first to educate in human rights. We see all our work that we do as part of a human rights education. And then there is a big difference within the police force if you do that in the primary education of police officials. And then you have to have a continuous education so that people can speak about their experiences. That very often you can see that police officials feel themselves being attacked, and then they feel themselves being victimized. On the other hand, you have the other person that feels victimized. The problem is that it's not easy really to launch an investigation against police officials.
Mm-hmm. If we speak of the victims, how can you protect the victims? What can you do about this?
Unfortunately, the Federal Commission Against Racism does not have a legal mandate, so we cannot be the advocate of victims, nor can we directly address a court in demanding that investigation is opened. But of course, the protection of victims and also the empowerment of victims is also one of our strong points in our work. We try to do this by the means that are at our disposal. So, for example, we created a network of counseling services specializing in questions of racism and empowering them to better understand, establishing really quality standards in the counseling work. We publish a report with this network together that shows each year how many cases have been presented to these counseling services.
Those counseling services, concrete, who are they? So, for example, if you are victim of racial discrimination or you feel being victimized, where can you go or what can you do? In
most of the larger cities today, you have still different possibilities. There are some towns or cities where you have a public ombudsman that deals with conflicts that a private person might have with officials, with the administration. You have NGOs that are specializing. These are the partners within this network, and I'm happy to say that within the new law of integration, the cantons now are held to create counseling services against discrimination. There might be a tricky point in this. I think one should be careful not to link too strongly together the question of racism with the question of integration.
Mm-hmm. Because, for example, if you say integration is more seen that has to be done from the people that migrate, but racism comes from both sides. Is that what you mean?
Yes, on the one hand, integration is a double process. The society should open and protect people from being denigrated against or discriminated against because they are immigrants. On the other hand, of course, the official policy says persons who immigrate shall also try with their best to adapt to the environment, to learn the language, etc. But one has to be careful not to put the burden one-sided, just on the shoulders of the immigrants.
I have a question on the counseling services that the cantons should open up. For example, question of representation. Is there any counsel that you would give in your commission to say that the immigrants should also feel represented, or that how do you structure them?
This is quite a complicated process now. There is, of course, there are not lots of money made at disposal of these counseling services. I think, first of all, quality standards are important. Of course, representation would be important, and that would, for example, be linked to this question about how can highly qualified people within a migration background be integrated in such processes. But here, I think we have just started the first step.
Okay. One last big question is, what is your advice to everybody concerning racism? What would you counsel them?
I think important is that we all acknowledge racism as being something normal, that we all have stereotyped images within ourselves about other people. What is important is that these stereotypes that we have do not lead us to act. Mm-hmm. So to prevent discriminatory acts and let these images just be in our heads or maybe in our minds, but then not act out in discrimination.
Because in your opinion, stereotypes are something negative in general?
There might be positive stereotypes, but the stereotyping, nevertheless, the essence of stereotyping is that you take away, you wipe away a person's individuality. You put persons in a box. It's always a group. And you do not honor a person's dignity as an individual. Also, stereotyping means that the person is not allowed to change and move away and to develop. And each migrant develops extremely in adapting to a new environment. Nobody who has lived in another country and in on another continent has not changed his whole personality and with new views, new adaptations. And stereotyping fixes you on a certain image.
Mm-hmm. So you would say, for example, stereotypes can make it hard for an individual as being part of this group to be integrated into society and to avoid racism against them.
As being recognized as an individual with his qualities, his or her qualities, with his professional qualification, with his nature as a person, with his character. And I think we should all be very watchful in society. People moralize very much this question of racism, and I think if you take it more natural, you can more easily deal with it. So if we say to each other we should be watchful, we should speak out, not be shy, not freeze when we see a case of discrimination or racism, but immediately tackle it, attack it, speak about it, bring it out to the open. I've heard stories in institutions where things were hidden under the carpet. Everybody knew that something is quite wrong and nobody would speak out, nobody would even have words for it. And then it's really a great damage is done. And the victim suffers.
Mm-hmm. So it has to be visible in that sense. As we're speaking from African Mirror, what would be your advice to people of African origin as they're very visible, as you said earlier?
I think to a certain extent the same advice as speak out, also demand your rights, speak also with people that are in your environment as something natural. They shy away from it. The person that is part of the majority always feels, I can only be the perpetrator, so I'm guilty. If you can take that away and say, okay, it's natural, we're also racist, even if we're black, we're racist. So, and you are racist because it's inherent in a human being, but we can fight it because it denigrates other people. It doesn't give them the same chance in society, and it hurts. And we don't want to be hurt, all of us.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you. Thank you.